Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome back to day two of our Infant Mental Health Build Up Conference. We are so excited to have you all with us today. And I'm just going to do a quick sound check. If you can hear me, if you can just type yes in the chat box before we get started, just to let me know everything is working okay. Yes, okay. Seeing lots of yeses. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Alrighty, so I am Jira Knight, the Director of Professional and Parent Education here at First 3 Years. And just to give you a little bit of background of First 3 Years, we are a statewide nonprofit organization that is dedicated to creating collaborative systems and advocacy for infants and their families across the state of Texas. So we are so excited to have you again for day two. On behalf of all of us at First 3 Years, welcome back to your second day. We are thrilled that you are joining us again today and spending your time with us. Now, before we get started, as always, I want to just begin with 60 seconds of mindfulness to ground us for the information that we are going to receive for today's session.
Hi, and welcome to Headspace. So no matter what's going on in your life right now, no matter how many thoughts are racing around your mind, no matter how the body's feeling, just take a moment to sit down and take a big deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. As you breathe in, a sense of taking in fresh air, the lungs expanding. As you breathe out, a sense of letting go of any stress in the body, in the mind, just feeling the muscles soften and relax. And close your eyes if you'd like to. One more, breathing deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth. And just take a moment to pause. Allow the thoughts to come and go. And then just gently opening the eyes again.
Thank you so much for joining in that moment. I hope that you were able to find a moment of focus and calm to prepare you for the amazing information that we're going to receive today. But before we do that, I want us to engage in a Mentimeter together. So if you will, either access the chat box and click the link that is provided for you in the chat box. And we're going to talk about what you hope to gain from our sessions of this conference today. So you can log into Menti at menti.com and use the code on the screen, or you can utilize the link in the chat box. What do you hope to gain from the conference today? Okay, I see how to better support infants, toddlers, and their families. Some tips for mental health advocacy. Anything else? More information to share with the parents that you work with. I love that one. I think you're absolutely going to get that today. How to benefit families, a better understanding of young children and mental health, more knowledge on trauma and helping others, resources to share with families, how to create more of a trusting relationship with the infants and toddlers in my class. I love it. Anything else? Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for sharing that with us on our Mentimeter. These are things that I know we are going to hear from Ms. Robyn today. So thank you for joining. Alrighty, as you can see, this is our day 2 agenda. And our closing keynote today will be presented by Ms. Robyn Goebel, LMSW Clinical. Robyn has over 15 years of practice in family and child therapy experience, specializing in complex trauma, attachment, and adoption. She will present on the types of experiences that infants may experience due to trauma and toxic stress, as well as the impact of those experiences that they have on the infant's stress response system, regulatory circuits, attachment, and sense of felt safety. Additionally, she will host an interactive workshop this afternoon where participants will learn how to help parents understand their infant's cues and offer the needed soothing. And before we get into that keynote, again, I want to share a very special thank you to our conference sponsors, who are United Way of Metropolitan Dallas Hopes Program, Help Me Grow North Texas, Kaplan Early Learning Company, and the Texas Health and Human Services Early Childhood Intervention Department. Thank you so much for all of your work that you do to support infants, toddlers, and their families across the state. Please be sure to check out our virtual exhibit hall that features the work of all of our incredible sponsors and has very valuable resources for the children and families that you serve. Also, please be aware, just as yesterday, we have a different Zoom link for our workshop. So after today's opening keynote, you will leave this webinar and access the workshop session via the link that will be in the chat box at the conclusion of this session. That link has also been emailed to you, but if you have not received it, please reach out to us at info@first3yearstx.org. Also, if you have any tech issues or tech questions, please reach out to us at techsupport@first3yearstx.org. And of course, as you are enjoying your day-to-day, don't forget to snap a screenshot of your computer or take a selfie with your computer and post it on social media. You can tag us at First 3 Years on all social media platforms. Now, without further ado, I would love to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Robyn Goebel. Robyn has over 20 years of practice in family and child therapy experience, specializing in complex trauma, attachment, and adoption. Robyn is a therapist, trainer, and consultant who recently relocated to Grand Rapids, Michigan from Austin, Texas. Robyn's diverse clinical training includes EMDR, including EMDR adapted for children with attachment trauma, somatic experiencing, TheraPlay, trust-based relational intervention, Circle of Security Parent Educator, the Alert Program, and Yogapeutics Aerial Yoga Level 1 Yoga Training Teacher. Robyn has integrated these training modalities with a foundation of attachment theory and relational neurosciences to create an attachment-rich, sensory-sensitive, and relational neurosciences supported healing environment for children and families. Robyn consults, teaches, and trains extensively throughout the U.S. She previously served as an instructor for the Foundations of Interpersonal Neurobiology Certificate Program at Portland Community College, as well as with the Adoptive and Foster Family Therapy Postgraduate Certificate Program. Robyn has served on the working board of the Global Association for Interpersonal Neurobiology Studies, and her first book, Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors, Brain, Body, Sensory Strategies That Really Work, will be published by Jessica Kingsley Publishers in late spring of 2023. Please help me give a warm welcome to Ms. Robyn Goebel.
Thank you. Jaira, thank you so much for the lovely introduction and for everything that y'all do to support the professionals out there, helping kids and families, but also all of you and the hard work that you do, taking care of our most vulnerable. I'm so completely delighted to be with you today. I'm going to get this screen shared. Let's make sure this works. All right, I'm going to assume that's shared. And if it didn't, someone needs to let me know. That bio, I sort of giggled as Jar was reading it. Because I was like, oh, recently relocated to Grand Rapids, Michigan is maybe not perfectly accurate anymore. But, I kind of live in COVID time, right? That's like recent. I mean, we relocated like right before the pandemic. It feels recent. But it was actually a long time ago. I had a clinical practice in Austin, Texas. And here we are, y'all. March and April are like the best time of year to live in Austin, Texas. And my teenage son is home from school today with a snow day. So that's what's happening today in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We are going to spend the next hour looking at how trauma and toxic stress impacts the developing brain. And then we'll spend time together later this afternoon in the workshop where we'll get very practical about taking this information and really using it to support our work with kids and families. So like Jaira said, my clinical experience has been with kids who have experienced some sort of trauma or toxic stress. As well as, at this point in 2023, not 2024 yet, I spend a lot of time talking about just nervous system vulnerability. That might not feel like it totally fits the category of trauma and toxic stress, but the kids that I work with, probably the kids that you work with, whether they have histories of trauma, toxic stress or not, have a history of nervous system vulnerability. So we're going to kind of keep that in mind too. And let's just get going, y'all. Let's dive in. I'm going to start with some basic brain development. And what we know is major overgeneralization here, but the brain develops according to neuroscientists. I've especially learned from Dr. Bruce Perry, but the brain's developing from the bottom up and the inside out. We're not going to get too nitty gritty into, complex brain development, but I do think when we get to like really understanding what's happening for these kids and their nervous systems and for their families as well, having some basic understanding of brain development and being able to teach their families some basic information about brain development is really, really important. One of the things that I tried very hard to do is to teach you in essentially the same way that I would teach parents so that you have the same language that I would use to teach parents, and you can just go out and you can just start using it right away. So bottom up, inside out. Now, again, we're staying in major gross overgeneralizations here. If you're some sort of like, neurophysiological experts, know that, of course, this is just the basics here, just what I think is helpful in our work, as well as in our work supporting families. So the brainstem then is at the bottom and most inside part of the brain. Okay, so bottom and most inside part means like we couldn't see it from the outside. So the very, very base of our skull kind of connects our skull to our spinal cord. And you know how we've heard talk about like the right and left hemisphere of the brain? The brainstem doesn't have a right or left hemisphere because it's so in the middle, it's so inside that there's just one brainstem. We don't really talk about hemispheres when it comes to the brainstem. So the brainstem is responsible for all of our autonomic functions like heart rate, respiration, temperature modulation, the parts of our autonomic nervous system that have a rhythm, right? So Temperature modulation has a rhythm. Like as temperature rises, we do things to kind of bring it down. If it gets too low, we do things to bring it up, right? Like there's a rhythm to temperature modulation. There's a rhythm to respiration. There's a rhythm to our heart rate, right? So all of that is mediated essentially by the autonomic nervous system and the brainstem. This also means that the brainstem is, for the most part, not fully functioning at birth. Not completely, right? Like I remember teeny tiny little babies, we still bundle them up, right? They need help with the autonomic function of temperature modulation, right? But within a couple months, they don't need as much help anymore. And healthy full-term infants, they're essentially like modulating their sugar on their own, right? They're sucking, they're eliminating, their hearts are beating and they're breathing without additional support, right? So that's all brainstem function. Now, what we care about brainstem function in our work with kids and families is how the brainstem is responsible for energy and arousal. It's responsible for the rhythms of our autonomic functions, which means it's responsible for energy and arousal. And that's going to translate really quite directly to what we're seeing in the kids and families and what we're helping them with. So you're going to just kind of hold that thought for now. Brainstem, energy, arousal. And what we know about the rhythms of the brainstem is that they're really being patterned in while the infant is still inside, is still developing inside the pregnant person, right? That the energy and arousal, the autonomic nervous system of the pregnant mama is setting the tone in a way for the rhythms of the developing baby's autonomic nervous system. So we can start again to think about how this might impact the clients that we work with. If we've got pregnant people who are really stressed or spending a lot of time in, lots of sympathetic activation, or so much stress that they're actually spending a lot of time in just kind of like a shutdown and collapse, or if their autonomic nervous system is being impacted by maybe mental health challenges, external, again, the kind of external stressors, maybe substance abuse, right? We can think about how the autonomic nervous system is impacted and then how that might be starting to impact the autonomic nervous system of the developing baby, and then how that impacts the developing toddler and preschooler. We'll get to that. The next part of the brain that develops is the limbic areas of the brain. Okay, so as we move up and out, right, we said the brainstem develops from the bottom up and the inside out. As we go up from the brainstem and start to come out, now that's when the brain starts to what we call lateralize, when we do have like a right and a left hemisphere, we have right and left limbic portions of the brain. So we're starting to move out, but we're not out to the outside of the brain yet. Like we can't look at the brain and see limbic unless we like cut into it, okay? So we're starting to come up, we're starting to come out. And what we know about the limbic portions of the brain are responsible for a whole lot of things, but what we're concerned with today are it's the limbic portions of the brain are kind of like the seat of the foundation of relational and attachment experiences, as well as the part of the brain that is like detecting felt safety. So the limbic portions of the brain are hard at work deciding, am I safe? And when maybe the decision is made that they're not safe, a message gets sent down to the brainstem, which is where the energy and arousal kind of home is, right? Then that message kind of goes down to the brainstem, and maybe some additional energy is activated. Okay. Now, when we think about regulation of energy and arousal, remember what you know about babies, right? Is that babies do not self-soothe, right? babies don't burst into the world with the skill of calming down on their own. They burst into the world with really good activation. They're good at crying. And they're also really good at the other side of the spectrum too, right? They're really good at sleeping. What they're not so good at is the going back and forth between the two, right? So what happens is babies, as they're born, and now we're really thinking about the limbic portions of their brain growing, attachment, safety, security. There's some intensity, of course, that comes when baby's nervous system gets activated, and the adult has to come in and connect to the baby and down-regulate their nervous system. And this process happening repeatedly is what is building in additional patterns and experiences of regulation. So regulation beyond like regulation of our heart rate. Now we're moving into like regulation of the energy and arousal specific to what's coming from like attachment and relationship perspective, right? And we know that the limbic portions of the brain are what we would call genetically primed, meaning they're just waiting for connection and relationships that happen through this co-regulation piece, like through the parent coming in and providing the soothing, right? That's how those relational experiences of co-regulation are inviting lots and lots and lots of neural connections to happen in the limbic parts of the brain. That eventually becomes what we would call self-regulation. Okay, so really what we know is that self-regulation is simply internalized co-regulation, meaning the infant pulls in and internalizes the regulating experiences that the parent is offering. That's how self-regulation is developed. This is an important nugget to hold on to because as our kids get older, they still, of course, need lots of support with regulation, right? And so we want to remember how regulation is developed, and it's developed through co-regulation. So another nugget to just tuck aside for now, we'll be coming back to that a lot, especially in this afternoon's workshop. Okay, then the next part of the brain to develop and come online are the cortical regions of the brain. Now, if we opened up my skull and looked at the brain, and you'd see like the waves, like the fulcrum, I'm sorry, I said the wrong word, but the waves that are coming in and out of the outside matter of the brain there, that is cortex. So if we open my skull, what you'd see, cortex. Now, the cortex begins to really start to come online between 18 and 36 months of age, when the lower parts of the brain have had enough safe and regulated experiences. Okay, they build like the foundation, which then allows the cortex to come online. And you can see this, right, in your work with toddlers, because their like language centers are starting to come online, right? They're asking questions, they're saying when, they're starting to talk a little bit more. So we can see the cortical parts of the brain really start to bloom in these precious little toddlers. When I'm working with families and with kids, because I work a lot like right directly with little ones, I don't talk about their cortex or their limbic or their brainstem. I talk with families and kids about like the thinking brain and then the feeling and sensing brain. And so I kind of have lumped like the cortex is the thinking brain, but then the feeling and sensing brain is like limbic and brainstem combined. So I don't get too granular with kids and families. And so again, kind of thinking and feeling brain. But actually, the language I really use now that I've developed and seems to work best for kids and families after all the years of play therapy that I've done is we talk about the owl brain and the watchdog or the possum brain. So the owl brain is the cortical parts of the brain, and the watchdog and the possum brains are the feeling and sensing parts of the brain that have lots of energy and arousal. And we will get to hang out a little bit more with the owl and the watchdog and the possum as we continue on with our time today and also in this afternoon's workshop. Okay, we're going to layer in one more piece here to the developing brain. Okay, and then we're going to start to look more clearly at some of the real specific nuances about the developing brain, and then how trauma, toxic stress impacts it. So the stress response system. Now, Dr. Perry talks about the stress response system quite a lot. What we know, this stress is simply like a demand on our body. Okay, so there can be good stress, and there can be stress that we would put under the label of toxic stress and trauma, right? And stress is just like anything that, puts a demand on our physiology. Being hungry or tired is stress. Needing connection is stress, right? Like stress is so varied, okay? And stress doesn't have to be considered negative. In fact, we really need stress for our brain, our body, and our stress response system to grow like big and strong and healthy. Dr. Perry talks about how good stress is stress that is predictable, reliable, and controllable. So from the developing brain's perspective, stress like being hungry and then getting fed, being lonely and then getting picked up and rocked, right? When the stress is predictable, reliable, and controllable, like the infant knows this stress happens, and then I feel better. And I don't feel bad for too long. Somebody helps me pretty quickly. When we have that kind of stress, we are really exercising our stress response system in a way that helps it grow big and strong. Okay. When there is stress that we would call more toxic stress and trauma, Dr. Perry's language is unpredictable, extreme, or prolonged. That's the kind of stress that can be really harmful, particularly to the developing brain. And that kind of stress, unpredictable, extreme, or prolonged, will contribute to what Dr. Perry calls a sensitized stress response system. So instead of having a stress response system that like kind of comes into play when there's some stress and handles the stress and then kind of like just rests back into just regular normal life again, sensitized stress response systems tend to be overworked and overactivated, and they come to the rescue too quickly, too fast, with a lot of intensity. So a lot of the kids that we see who've been impacted by trauma, toxic stress have then sensitized stress response systems. That is largely what could explain challenging behavior, extreme tantrums, difficult behavior that's kind of outside the norm of typical child development is often explained by having a sensitized stress response system. And Dr. Perry tells us that it's those first 2 months of life that really, really matter. So from his book, What Happened to You, he writes, the experiences of the first 2 months of life have a disproportionately important impact on the long-term health and development of the developing individual. This has to do with the remarkably rapid growth of the brain early in life and the organization of those all-important core regulatory networks. So often we hold on to the belief that what happens to babies before they really remember doesn't impact them that much. And even as we're more and more aware of how early preverbal experiences impact kids, I still hear folks really kind of downplay, like especially those first 0 to 6 or 8 weeks, right? Like I hear so often like, well, XYZ happened, but they were only 2 weeks old, or they were in their adoptive family by the time they were 4 weeks old. They were only in foster care for 4 weeks, or they were only in the hospital for 4 weeks, or, there's often this qualifier of the word only. And actually, what we know from Dr. Perry's research is those first 2 months of life matter more than anything from the perspective of the developing brain, the developing stress response system, and these core regulatory networks. And the core regulatory networks are like the foundation of everything. Okay. So hold that also in mind here as we continue on, that these first 2 months of life, and in utero as well, are really setting the groundwork for the developing brain and child. Now, this is not like a death sentence. There's so much we can do to help repair and strengthen these regulatory networks. We're going to talk about that. That's why we do the work that we do. If there was no hope, we wouldn't do this work and we wouldn't be here at this conference. There's so much hope, but we can hold that hope in connection with, like in the same place as the recognition and understanding that these earliest 2 months of life really, really, really matter. So when you're working with families who are confused, or they don't understand, or they're taking it personally, right, that their child is really struggling, help them see with so much compassion for them and for their child, those first 2 months of life matter tremendously. And their child's current struggles, maybe they're 12 months old or 36 months old or whatever, are related to those first 2 months of life. And that's not their fault. That's not another grown-up's fault. It's just a truth. And there's a lot that we can do to help support building in more resilience into the developing brain and specifically those regulatory networks and the stress response system. So we're going to look at 3 core concepts: regulation and connection and felt safety, specifically through the lens of how are these experiences developed? How is regulation developed? What does the development of connection look like in babies and parents? And how do babies develop their sense of safety in the world? Okay, we're going to look at how that's developed, how trauma and toxic stress impact the development of regulation, connection, felt safety. And then we'll start to look at, well, what does that mean for the behaviors, for like what we see kind of on the outside? Then in the workshop, we'll look at how do we help, okay? So felt safety. Felt safety is a word that first appeared in the literature, to the best that I can tell, back in the 70s. Dr. Alan Shroof used the language felt security, actually. And that essentially he was talking about what we're talking about now when we say felt safety. And Dr. Alan Shroof says that felt safety is the subjective experience of an infant, and based on their environment, their caregiver, and their inner experience. So if a infant is experiencing felt safety or not is dependent on not just if they are technically physically safe, but it's subjective, but each individual infant's making their own appraisal of their felt safety, and they're looking at information that's existing in their environment, in their own inner world, and from their caregiver. Felt safety is being determined in these lowest parts of the brain. It's the feeling and sensing brain, the watchdog and possum brain, that's asking, am I safe or am I not safe? Okay, so felt safety is all about these lowest parts of the brain. So not the cortical parts of the brain. So the feeling and sensing brain's not really asking the question, not like the cortical parts of our brain would, but it's taking in information to making the determination of, am I safe or am I not safe? If the feeling and sensing part of the brain could ask questions, it would ask questions like, do you really know me? Like, do you see me? And do you see me for who I really am, not just for my behaviors? Okay. This feeling and sensing brain is going to ask questions like, are you there for me? Can you help me? Can I rely on you to help me? Will you be with me through all the hard stuff? Will you be with me when I'm feeling good? And will you be with me when I'm feeling bad? Those are the kinds of questions that if the feeling and sensing brain could ask questions, those are the kinds of questions they would ask to decide, am I safe or not safe? Now, John Bowlby, father of attachment, agreed with Truth about the subjectiveness of felt safety when he described how children are assessing their caregiver's availability, not based just on what is actually happening in the moment, but also based on all of their previous experiences with that caregiver. So babies are using their memories, right? They're using what's happened in the past that helps me make sense of what's happening right now. Okay. And how does that impact my expectations about what I can expect from my caregiver? Are you really there for me? And again, it's not just an objective assessment based on what's happening in the here and now. It's based on everything that's happened before. In his book, Attachment and Psychotherapy, David Wallen adds in this other important concept of felt safety. He emphasizes that one really important component of experiencing felt safety is for an infant to have a caregiver who helps them feel better, right? So when they're distressed, can they expect somebody to help them? Do they have a reliable caregiver who can kind of come in and ride like the wave of dysregulation with them? That contributes to their experience of felt safety. And then we can look back again at Shroof's work and with his colleague Waters, who goes on to just clarify a little bit more that from the child's inner experience piece, it's things like their mood, right? Their health, their physical condition, the imaginings in their minds, being hungry or tired or stressed. Like all of those things impact a child's sense of felt safety as well. Okay, so felt safety isn't only about the child's relationship with a caregiver. And that's something I've noticed over the last, like maybe kind of decade, as we've talked more about this concept of felt safety, that it gets oversimplified to mean something about the child's experience and their relationship with their caregiver. And that isn't true. Like that's just one portion of felt safety. So when I'm looking at kids and their behavior and being like, well, what's this kid's experience of felt safety? I'm not only thinking about their relationship with their caregiver. I'm thinking about like what's happening in their inner world. Because if things are off internally, that is going to impact their experience of felt safety. And we see that then in the energy and arousal that's expressed in their nervous system, and then that comes out in behaviors. So a little bit more recently, and kind of the late 90s, I think, Dr. Steve Porges of the polyvagal theory, he introduced his concept of neuroception to describe like the neural mechanisms that are at play with our individual assessment of felt safety. Okay, so he took what, Shroof and Waters and Wallen and Bowlby had been talking about really for decades without the layer of neuroscience in it. He just added in the neuroscience. Okay, so he helped us understand like the process that's happening when kids are making these assessments, not just kids, all of us, when we're making these assessments that ultimately are helping us determine if we're experiencing felt safety or not. So Dr. Porges says that neuroception is assessing cues from three places: our inner world, our outside, which is our environment, and then the in-between space, which is like the relational space, specifically with our caregiver. Okay, so neuroception is the neural mechanisms that describes like the spidey sense of taking in all this information way outside our awareness, right? Like we're not sitting here going, do I feel safe or not? Right? It's just constantly happening, our assessment of felt safety. Okay. Now, I'm going to add one more little piece to this. This gets we're going to add some layers here for felt safety. Okay. To help us understand why we might see behaviors from kids that suggest they're not experiencing felt safety when objectively we would look at them and be like, listen, everything here is fine. You're totally safe. Right. So this is kind of speaks to what Bowlby said too, about how we're not just making the assessment based on like what the caregiver is doing right now, but based on all of our memories from the caregiver. So all of us are constantly creating our own version of reality. Okay. My version of reality is always just mine. I don't share it with anybody else. And that's because how we're doing that is we're like pulling in these two streams of information in our brain. And you can think of it as like there's one stream of information that's everything that's happening right now. And then there's another stream of information of everything that's happened in my own unique past. And so like if you and I were really together in the room right now, we'd be having relatively similar nows, right? But our stream of the past would be quite different because mine's mine and yours, yours, right? And so we have these two different streams that are constantly coming together in every moment. And those two streams together are what make up our own subjective reality. So some folks have streams of the past, right? You can already start to make sense of this, have streams of the past that have a lot of danger in them. And that is, of course, impacting how they feel in the now. Now that often when I share this little tidbit with people feel really kind of like overwhelmed and discouraged. Like, why does so much of our experience in reality have to be so related to the past? Like, I think that can feel really overwhelming, but actually it's really, really important. Like we would not be able to do life in any way, shape or form if we weren't mostly operating out of the past, right? Like we wouldn't be able to like brush our teeth every day. I mean, we wouldn't even remember that brushing our teeth was a thing to do, let alone like turning on the faucet, where the toothbrush is, and how to brush our teeth, right? And then of course, we brush our teeth on autopilot, right? Like how many of us can't even remember, think about it in the moment. Did you brush your teeth today? Right? And now maybe it's like, yeah, for sure. I totally remember brushing your teeth, but there may be a few of you who are like, oh, I think so, right? Because we do these like daily tasks on autopilot, right? This is good. Like imagine how unbelievably clunky life would be if we weren't doing most things based on memory. And in many ways, it's kind of even hard to imagine that. So don't feel discouraged by this. It's really important that this is how reality gets created. And then we know that the brain is asking the question, am I safe or not safe? It's taking in the data from all of those places, inside, outside, and in between, creating that stream of the now, merging it together with the stream of the past, and asking safe or not. And it's doing this at least 4 times every second. 4 times every second, there's an opportunity for there to be a shift in the appraisal of the level of felt safety. That's wild. Right. It's hard to, that's like something that's hard to even wrap our brains around. Cause like I could say 4 times every second, but it takes me like 2 seconds to say that, right? 4 times every second is a quarter of a second. And conceptualizing how fast that is pretty hard for our brains. So let's just say super fast, and it can change really fast. Okay, so our brain's taking all this information from inside, outside, between. And if all the information that it pulls in, the majority of it feels safe, right? There's more kind of cues of safety coming in than cues of danger. Our nervous system shifts into it, kind of rests into what I call connection mode. It's where We are preferencing connection. We're open and available for connection. We're seeking connection where we want to be connected to ourselves and to others. And this is where my wise owl lives. Okay, so remember that wise owl that was kind of perched on top of the brain and with like that cortical part, right? When we're in connection mode, our most fully developed brain gets to be available. Now, of course, what that means for a 3-year-old and what that means for a 45-year-old are, generally speaking, pretty different. So we have to hold all of this in developmental considerations, right? Like the owl brain of a toddler and the owl brain of a preschooler, right? And a school-age child, they're all pretty different. But if we hold it in developmental context, our owl brain, this top part of our brain that's in charge when we're feeling safe, has the capacity for cause and effect. It can learn from consequences. There's some impulse control, is open and available for cooperative and compromising behavior. And they understand and care about somebody else's point of view. Now, again, age appropriate. Y'all work with very tiny children for the most part. So again, 3-year-olds, their capacity for this is pretty different as kids get older. But we can think about the parents we work with even through this lens. Now, if the nervous system, if the brain takes in all this information, inside, outside, in between, and decides that it's not safe in the moment, right? The majority of information that's coming in feels not safe. The brain flips into what I call protection mode. So instead of preferencing and being focused on connection, the brain and nervous system is now more focused on protection. Now, one of the aspects of being in protection mode is trying to find connection mode again, right? Protection mode does want to find and seek safety, but is doing that largely through kind of protective behaviors. Okay, so the nervous system, it's really just one or the other. Safe or not safe, connection or protection. And this is true about all brains. We haven't even talked about trauma and toxic stress yet. So all of us and the parents we work with and their children have a nervous system that is either in connection mode or protection mode, and it can flip really regularly, right? Like technically in a quarter of a second, it could change. So the first thing I want you to ponder is, before I even go any further, think about the kinds of behaviors that parents want their kids to change. And think about the kind of behaviors that we want the parents to change, right? Because working with parents is tough. Sometimes they have behaviors that we want them to change. Would you say those behaviors, the kinds of behaviors that we want them to change, are they coming from a nervous system that's feeling safe and in connection mode, or a nervous system that's feeling not safe and in protection mode? Generally speaking, the kinds of behaviors that we want to change, that parents are seeking services for, are behaviors of a nervous system that's in protection mode. And same for the parents. The behaviors of our parents that we work with are kind of stressing us out. They tend to be behaviors of a nervous system in protection mode. Now, remember, I talked about the owl, but I also talked about the watchdog and the possum. So the watchdog is in the protected side of the brain, in protection mode. The watchdog is one pathway that protection mode could choose to go down to. And the watchdog brain is scared, but it acts scary. The watchdog brain has energy, right? It can tell you, it like barks and growls and maybe runs away, has all these behaviors that are trying to help it stay safe. Okay. So lots of energy, watchdog, protection mode when the brain's not feeling safe. Now, there's also this other pathway I call the possum brain, or the possum pathway. And the possum pathway is when the nervous system is not feeling safe, and also it's the opposite of the watchdog. So where watchdogs get lots of energy in their arms and legs and can run and yell, possums lose all that energy, and their bodies get floppy and their heads hang, and they often get quieter or talk less. Not always, but that's generally speaking, they can go down that pathway. Okay, so we have owl when we're feeling safe, we have the watchdog, or the possum when we're feeling not safe. And the watchdog and the possum are both from the nervous system that's feeling not safe. They're just two different energy pathways. Lots and lots and lots of energy is watchdog. Total lack of energy is possum. Okay, so let's go back to here for a second, because remember how I said each of us creating our own subjective reality, and the stream of the past and the stream of the now come together, right? For folks who have experienced toxic stress and trauma, and this is true even for tiny little babies, right? Because memory is being formed even before birth. So when folks experience trauma and toxic stress, their stream of the past, that's kind of merging with what's happening now to help them decide what's happening in reality. Am I safe or not safe? Their stream of the past is more like a tsunami of the past. When the past is full of trauma and toxic stress, it becomes more powerful. Like our minds kind of preference it in a way over the now. And this has to do with memory science and all sorts of complex things. But let's just stay with the metaphor because it's enough. There's like this tsunami of the past that when we have histories of trauma and toxic stress, chronic misattunement, haven't gotten the experience of safety or connection or co-regulation that we need, the past feels very, very present in the now. Okay. It's not just these two streams that come together. It's this one huge tsunami kind of takes over. Right. And if the tsunami is full of not safe because of experiences of trauma and toxic stress, what that does is it leaves the nervous system in the now tipped towards danger mode. Right? Because we're bringing the past together with the present, even though the present, you and I would look at it and say, objectively, it's pretty safe. The individual, including a tiny baby, but also their parents, could be still experiencing a lack of felt safety. Their nervous system's really in protection mode, feeling danger because of all the things that have happened in their past. What ends up happening is that, obviously metaphorically speaking here, is that the watchdog and the possum brain remain on like high alert, just stuck in protection mode. It's almost as if it's decided that asking the question, safe or not safe, is just simply too much work. Like, why would I even ask? It's way too much work. I'm just going to stay stuck on not safe, right? Which is super duper exhausting. And it is impacting brain development, right? Like you all know that the developing brain of a young baby and toddler and preschooler who's experienced a lot of trauma and toxic stress, it is not uncommon to see developmental delays, right? Delays in their cognition coming online in the way that we would expect given their chronological age, because their system is kind of so focused on the danger, and their watchdog and possum brain stay really on alert that their owl brain is late in developing. Okay, so that's felt safety. We also we're going to talk about connection and regulation and the impact of trauma, toxic stress on those parts of the developing brain. So to look at connection, we're going to look a little bit back again at Dr. Porges, who's a medical doctor, right? He's a scientist, and his work indicates, he's concluded from his research that connection is a biological imperative, meaning it's something at the core of being humans. We're designed and created to be in connection. In fact, our brains develop in connection, and we need connection to be okay. So our brains are actually assuming connection. They believe that our brain believes connection is our baseline. And when we can't find connection, that's experienced as a cue of danger, and we flip into protection mode. We're going to turn really briefly to the work of Jaak Panksepp. I'm just going to give you a quick little overview. And so I'll maybe pique your curiosity and you might want to go learn more about this. We're just going to do it super briefly. So Jaak Panksepp, social scientist, he researched and wrote about what he called affective neuroscience, emotional neuroscience. And he says his theory suggests that we have 7 ingrained emotion systems that we're born with. They're ingrained. We come into the world with these. Okay. There's one primary system underneath all the rest. And the one primary system underneath all the rest of this, there's 7 total. One primary system is the seeking system. And one of the things that's always seeking is connection. Always, 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 always the brain is looking for connection. Okay. If it finds connection, it feels safe. And then the nervous system is open for the experiences of care and play. And eventually, as the baby develops into a teenager, what Dr. Panksepp called the lust system comes online. So that's when like hormones and puberty and all that kind of stuff is happening, in preteens and teenagers, right? So when we find connection, we're available to give and receive care, we're available for play, and then ultimately the lust system can come online. If we aren't finding connection, we're always looking for it. And if we don't find it, we flip into protection mode and go through what Panksepp calls separation distress. And if we still don't find connection, we escalate into fear. And if we still don't find connection, we escalate into rage. Okay, now what on earth does any of this actually mean in real life? Let's look at a video. And I'm going to kind of talk you through Panksepp's theory here, watching a video. So we're going to watch a video of the still face experiment. You may have seen the still face experiment before, maybe just haven't looked at it through this lens. Okay, so the still face experiment is, mom and a baby or caregiver and a baby come into like a laboratory, situation. And the mom is given instructions to interact with the baby like normal. And then the mom is given a cue and she's told to turn away from the baby. When she turns back to the baby, to have a still face. And then she maintains the still face until the experimenter tells her to then go back to engaging with her baby as usual. So as a heads up, this is kind of a distressing video. It's hard to watch the distress of the baby. So reassure your own nervous system that it is not last very long. The mom does quickly return to being present with the baby.
In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's what they want to do. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate
her care circuitry, giving and receiving, and some of her play
circuitry
circuitry is online. See, look at the playfulness.
What the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby.
Always seeking connection.
Very quickly.
Instantly. Baby sees you're not here anymore.
Abilities to try and get the mother back.
Moves into what Panksepp calls that separation distress.
She points because she's used to the mother looking where
she's trying to get the parent to come back. There's like a, hey, pay attention to me. Hey.
Puts both hands up in front of her and says, what's happening here? She makes
when their nervous system kind of escalates into the fear.
Like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes when they don't get the normal reaction. They react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
And it starts to turn into what Panksepp would call rage. Now, the mama returns and very, very, very quickly, the baby is soothed. Okay, so what we know is this baby comes quickly back into, connection is back, I'm okay. But we see how through that demonstration of the still-based experiment, how quickly children, even babies, this is true about all humans, okay? All of us do this as well. We're always searching for connection. And the moment that we can tell the connection's not there, our nervous system flips into protection mode, and we start to do things that, one, demonstrate our distress, but two, are designed to get connection back. Right. And so we can think about how the, preschoolers and toddlers that we work with are doing that too, right? With their clinging behavior, or with the kinds of behavior that they're doing, which has a very clear, like, hey, pay attention to me, right? And how so often our instinct is actually to withdraw connection more, right? Because we don't want to reinforce bad behavior. No, we're not reinforcing bad behavior. We are meeting the need of the nervous system. That once we meet the need of the nervous system, which is seeking connection, once we give them connection, their nervous system flips back into safe connection mode, right? We're not teaching them bad behavior. We're teaching them that when they go searching for connection, they'll find it, and then they'll feel okay again. We certainly can't talk about connection without thinking about Bowlby just a little bit. And I do think that remembering what attachment behaviors are from Bowlby's perspective can help parents decode their baby's behaviors, which we're going to talk about this afternoon. Or next in the workshop. So Bowlby reminds us that attachment isn't just about emotional or relational experience. Attachment is actually about our physical survival. So it makes a lot of sense that we would see bad behavior in kids who aren't feeling the connection that they need, because the loss of connection or attachment feels dangerous, right? So Bowlby says, we have these three attachment behaviors. Number one is seek, monitor, and attempt to maintain proximity. Babies do that in all sorts of ways, don't they? Right? They're fussing, and that helps us keep proximity to them, right? It helps us know, oh, they need me. And so we go close. So that's an attachment behavior, right? But also being really cute, that's an attachment behavior because it keeps us close to them, right? And then, of course, as babies get older, they develop their motor skills, and they can use their bodies to seek, monitor, and maintain proximity, right? These are attachment behaviors, and our bigger kids are doing it too. The second attachment behavior Bowlby talks about is using the attachment figure as a secure base. So when the baby feels secure in the safety that their caregiver is there, their kind of safe cup is filled. And that gives their nervous system the safety to go out into the world and be curious and explore. Okay, so curiosity and exploration is pretty innate, but we really need to feel safe in order for it to emerge. Okay, so safety in our attachment figure gives us the security to go out and explore. And as we get bigger, we do this in other kinds of ways. And the distance of how far we can be from the caregiver and still feel okay grows. And the third attachment behavior, according to Bowlby, is that as our danger system gets triggered, our attachment system brings us back to our safe haven. Okay, so danger, something's not right, I'm not safe. The next thing that happens is go to attachment figure. And again, that happens throughout the lifespan, even, of course, when we're grown-ups. So what we want to think about with trauma and toxic stress is, how does trauma and toxic stress impact the connection circuitry, right? If the trauma and toxic stress occurs in the attachment relationship, and this happens even outside experiences of like overt abuse and neglect, but let's like in medical trauma, right? When there's or just a highly sensitive nervous system, when there's a lot of dysregulation in the nervous system and the baby isn't getting the soothing that they need, even if the caregiver is attempting to offer it, that can be experienced by the baby as some toxic stress and chronic misattunement. So when babies experience trauma and toxic stress inside the attachment relationship, what happens is the caregiver triggers then the danger circuitry. It's like they're getting linked together. So go towards attachment when I'm in danger, sends the baby towards their attachment figure, but it's like, oh, oops, that's where I'm in danger. Okay. And this ultimately results in a nervous system that experiences connection as danger. So instead of connection being regulating and a place that we can turn to when we're feeling unsafe, it starts to be experienced as an additional cue of danger. And then these kids start to learn, I can't trust anybody to help me. I have to take care of myself. And we can probably see how that comes out in the kids that we work with. Again, we're going to talk about this more practically this afternoon. Okay, so for the remaining portion of our time, we're going to talk about the concept of regulation. So regulation is a word that describes to a lot of that applies to a lot of things. Regulation is about maintaining balance. Okay, like the thermostat in my house regulates the temperature. All right, we're going to think about the word regulation through the lens of the energy and arousal in our nervous system. Okay, so real briefly, our autonomic nervous system has both an accelerator and a brake, and it has up energy, it has down energy. And when we go up with energy, we get, energy in our arms and our legs, and that can be from surprise or excitement, or if I'm experiencing danger, that can be watchdog, fight, flight. And then we have our parasympathetic brake, which brings us our energy down. It can bring us into a relaxed and calm place. It allows our owl brain to emerge. And if we're experiencing significant danger, we have a brake that's kind of like the emergency brake that brings us down into collapse. And that's the possum pathway that we talked about super briefly. So a regulated nervous system has these rises and falls in sympathetic and parasympathetic energy, up and down, like in this nice balance. And our window of tolerance then is the space inside our nervous system where we can manage those ups and downs. We can tolerate stress and increased energy and arousal without freaking out. That kind of looks like this, up and down. Wide variety of feelings, even mad, but we can do it inside our window of tolerance. Now, let's look at how regulation is developed. This is so important for how we're going to help parents with their older kids. Okay, regulation is developed actually through the attachment cycle. And so we can look at the attachment cycle and see how that is about a baby having a need, and then the caregiver coming in and meeting that need, right? And the caregiver comes in with a similar energy, right? Like baby has some sympathetic energy and the caregiver first is like, oh, the baby's crying. And they go, and then the caregiver soothes the baby. And then finally the baby is soothed and feels safe, seen, soothed, and secure. That's the language of Siegel and Bryson. Now, that's how regulation is developed, right? This part here, sympathetic accelerator, baby cries, up. The caregiver comes in, exercises the baby's parasympathetic brake. Baby cries, soothing, exercises the parasympathetic brake. And it's especially developing the part that allows the baby to shift in and out from sympathetic to parasympathetic, sympathetic to parasympathetic. Again, babies are good at crying, they're good at sleeping. What they need help with is going back and forth between the two of them. This is actually literally making brain changes. So this is an image of a neuron, a brain cell. And the long part here is an axon. And the messages that travel from brain cell to brain cell go down the axon. Okay. And so when babies are born, the messages are traveling down the axon and they're just traveling kind of slowly. as babies experience the co-regulation that they're getting from their caregivers, what happens is around the axon of the neuron, the long part, messages are sent, develops this coating of myelin, and myelin helps axons work better. So what is happening is that from the experience of co-regulation, babies are developing their neural circuitry that is contributing to their development of regulation. Okay. We know that self-regulation is only developed from experiences of co-regulation. And in fact, we can look at how co-regulation is really just self-regulation is really just internalized co-regulation. Children develop the ability to self-regulate from being co-regulated. And so many of our kids' behavioral challenges are about not experiencing the co-regulation that they need. So let's look at this, like, instead of the crying baby getting the co-regulation that they're longing for, trauma and toxic stress leaves the baby like kind of stuck in this up-regulated spot, and nobody ever comes in to soothe them. So eventually they kind of just crash, right? And then they're crying again, and they crash, and then they're crying, and like nobody's helping to develop these regulatory circuits. And what happens from there is sort of this kind of classic mountain out of a molehill phenomenon, right? Like teeny tiny stressors, like I can't reach the toy that I want, or my block tower fell down, or I want a snack right now, not in 5 seconds, right? These are stressors, but they're small stressors. But to a sensitized stress response system that hasn't gotten the amount of co-regulation that they need, tiny, tiny stressors evoke big, big, big responses, right? There's this like overactive watchdog and possum brain with an underactive owl brain. Okay, the stress response system is really sensitized. And so instead of having this nice up and down regulatory system, it's stuck on and stuck off, right? It's 0 to 60, right? And a lot of the parents that you work with, well, first of all, a lot of the parents that you work with, their nervous system looks like this, but they also really feel like their child's nervous system looks like that, right? These kids and the grownups have really overactive watchdog brains, tiny stressor, huge response, and really super duper scared possum brains. Okay, so as we're coming into our final minute or so together here today, how we help this, how we help families and caregivers of kids with histories of trauma and toxic stress, is we help them by what I call putting on their X-ray vision goggles. We want them to see their child's behaviors through this lens of regulation, connection, and felt safety, because that helps them respond to their babies and toddlers and preschoolers in a way that will grow their regulatory circuits. That's the goal, to grow their regulatory circuits. When we have kids who are regulated, when we have kids who are feeling safe, and we have kids who are connected to themselves and to others. I said that out of order. Regulated, connected kids who feel safe and also know what to do. Sometimes we have to teach kids, the right thing to do in a certain situation. When we have kids who are regulated, connected, and feeling safe, they're doing well. Generally speaking, they're behaving in ways that aren't overly stressing us out. We feel like competent caregivers, right? So that's what we're going to do this afternoon, is talk about how can we help caregivers see their children's behavior through this lens of regulation, connection, felt safety, so that they could respond in these co-regulating ways instead of with more traditional punishing or withdrawal of attention or connection, that actually continues to keep the regulatory circuits in this kind of like metaphorically on fire way, right? We really want to help calm their regulatory system, help the child feel safe, grow their regulatory circuits, and then the kinds of behaviors that we're hoping for, as well as just like developmental milestones, will begin to emerge. So we're going to get real practical about that this afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ms. Robyn. I just want to share my screen really quickly before we head out on our break today. Just please be reminded, as stated earlier, our workshop link is different from the link that you are on now. So please refer to the link that has been placed in the chat box or the link that is in your email to join our workshop session in about 30 minutes, and we will see you guys back at 1:45. Have a great break.